A person cannot admire anything as opposed to criticize it higher than his own level. To start off with verbally, the ramifications of this, to take it somewhere else, but to start though, produces the shoddy, the tacky, and I don't think I'm being harsh, the totally unexceptional gods that man has produced. Now, for those of you who might be getting this on tape, assuming it's still making it to tape at some other time, this is not an attack on religion or gods, because you should be able to easily see that the notion of gods at every ordinary level is simply the idea of a more advanced man writ larger, being able to institutionalize it, and it is also in the same league as ideas. But let's stay for a second with gods, because that has always seemed so important, whether it be literal, figurative, mythological, to man, that even those that would deny that they have any particular religious guns to grind, that used to be axes, but I know that you people are all card-carrying members of the Anti-Cliche League, so even those who would deny that they had any particular religious notions to support would say that the ideas of gods have always in some way reflected the aspirations of man, the subconscious drives of man, the silent, subterranean, gross aspects of man's character, and that they come out in the idea of gods. But it has never been noticed, not that there's not plenty of ordinary people that life has attacked gods and religion, we're not talking about that, but it has never been not noticed on any level that would approach being some sort of true, cold-blooded, meaningful energy behind it. That is, as ordinary people would think, some objective view of the totally unexceptional nature of gods. Now, at first, it would probably strike people that that's not true, that I shouldn't even say that because it's just not true, even if you're not religious. To think, well, it's not true because our ideas of gods are just few. Well, godlike. Think about it. You can think about it all you want to, because what we opened up with is truly an operational three-dimensional theorem, to give it to you easily, and that is a person cannot admire anything higher than his own level. He cannot admire, nor can he aspire, but he cannot even admire it. Think about all the ideas of man's gods. Now, they're always, all the way from Zeus down to New Age metaphorical ideas of Jesus, and anything in between and off to the side and over in the ravines. All of the ideas of the gods are always at a very, if they want to have it this way, crude and subterranean, feral level. The gods are always of such a physical wherewithal as to make mincemeat of men. There's no doubt about that. Zeus can just turn around and just wipe out half a city. Insofar as them having any admirable attributes, what are they? What? I return you again. At the very best, you could see it as being man's induced ideas of a better self written on a larger scale. But a little less than that, which I would suggest to you is not much, but a little less than that is simply the gods being no more than man reflected larger. Because all the notions of gods, and you don't have to pick on any religion, because it's not tied to, it's not based on religion, it's based on the nervous system and the energy of life. All gods everywhere are what? They're mad, they're angry, they're jealous, they're vindictive, they're warlike, got bad memories. And as I was going to try and point out to you, are totally, completely unexceptional here. Which, of course, is not the God's fault. If there was such a thing as anthropomorphic gods. It is the fault, if you want to see it this way, of the piece of hardware trying to deal with this. That is, the human nervous system. It's the best it can do. But the gods, and again, maybe we stop for just a second. Even if you were non-religious and if you were just looking at this in a kind of intellectually or an intellectual theological way, you might immediately want to say, well, that's not true, because men attribute to the gods supreme intelligence. They even call them omnipotent know-it-alls. Really? Now, sure, they can call them that. You can call Cement Block a physics teacher. You can call anybody anything you want to. But look at the gods in every religion, your forefathers, anybody else. They may be stronger. They may can send down floods. They may be able to stop floods. They may be even to get out of an IRS audit. But when it comes to this, they are not much at all. Shoddy. They are no better than man. Although I didn't do a pickup, I assume that everyone recalls what we have been talking about for the last few nights about how you cannot rise above that which you criticize. That is, you cannot, if you respond to an energy flow that seems to be criticism of some kind, any way that you react to it, any way that you defend yourself, justified, otherwise, any other term you want, you cannot rise above the level of that which you're responding to. And then we go in a little further and point out that your own criticism, you cannot take critical note of anything any better off than you are. If there is such a thing as better off. If there are people around that are smarter, more conscious, more anything, people that you would admire, that you say you would admire, if there are such creatures around, or if there are such ideas around, you could not make critical note of them. You simply would not see them in any critical light, assuming that you had any awareness of them, because you could have an awareness of them by name, but you would be in no position, you or anyone, to take critical note of anything at a higher level. Just to be sure that all of you realize that we have not changed the subject, and what I was admitting now was the part that we hadn't gotten to, was that also a person cannot admire, cannot aspire, cannot cherish, cannot picture as being superior anything greater than the person, greater than your understanding, more evolved than your nervous system. You cannot. And therefore, the ideas of gods that at first, as I said, many people would want to say, hold on, that's not true, because men can imagine gods as being, well, godlike. And that's just would almost seem to close the subject, and you have to say, well, you're right. Because even if we don't have a clear picture of the gods, just our imagination of them puts them in a whole other ballpark. They are in a totally new classification by themselves. And you don't even think about it. Unless, of course, you think about it. And then you realize that I was not being harsh at all to call them tacky, shoddy, totally unexceptional. They may be able, by imagination, by man's claim, to fly through the air, walk on water, beat up people, beat up whole nations. They may be able to do that, but so what? And of course that you have got to by now take with a certain degree of mythical salt. That if they used to do that, they've calmed down because you don't see them doing it nowadays. But even if you believe your forefathers' legends, what kind of big deal is that? You could have giants. You could have true Amazons of some nature. You could have perhaps a whole bunch of unruly professional wrestlers that ran amok. And they, and they might get around and push around large segments of the world. But so what? Are you going to call them gods? Now, at that level, at a good red circuit level, you can certainly be impressed by somebody who's 6'4" and 380 pounds and looks like they could take your little head between their fingers. You could be impressed on that basis, like I don't think that I will say anything adverse about his mother. But insofar as attributing to them any sort of superiority in any way that you would admire, if indeed you did consider that superior, look at what level men are deitizing their imagination, which is a closed circuit because life is doing it to you anyway, but the projection of some superior creature. Look how totally unexceptional the pictures are. all religions, all stripes. There is a continuing scene that is really exemplary. It's every religion, and it's people bring it out in the cities, within their institutions, all over the world, throughout time, and that's the picture of some pious man entreating, pleading with the gods for the God's forgiveness for the person's continual failure to please the God. It passes at that level. It just strikes people at that level as being proper. That it, as I said, seems to be just a living prime example of the relationship between poor man and these superior creatures. That if there is anything that we should have to say to them, or him or her, if there's anything, if there's any verbal connection to be made, if there's anything that we could say to these superior creatures that would be in any way worthwhile, that in any way should justify them giving us their attention, what would it be? About all that seems proper is to say, hey, if you're listening, I want to tell you the truth. I ask you again, I know I don't before, but my God, I let you down again. I did not live up to whatever it is that's involved. Think about that. But again, at another level, it's no criticism, but at one level, it seems, it feels in the nervous system, once those sounds, in whatever language, and whatever would be the proper time, that would strike people in that milieu, that the sound of, I ask your forgiveness. The only thing I feel worthy to speak to you about is to ask your forgiveness for my failure again, that I have not lived up to whatever the hell it is that we're talking about. It strikes the nervous system as being, at the ordinary level, as being proper. What else are you going to say to a God? I mean, knowing you as you do, and knowing God's, at least by reputation and their description, if you could get the God's attention for a second, what's the only thing you could say that would not just be asinine, almost insulting? You're not going to speak to him on the same level like, well, let's say, Roger, Larry, whatever his name is, how's it going? What are you going to say? If you thought you might catch his ear, the only thing that seems proper is to ask his forgiveness for failing again. If there was any truly non-mortally reflected superior being, now you're just going to have to take what I've been saying, just a fair description of what goes on in life, and then try, even without putting words on it, which I can't either, to think what would be the exception to that. In other words, gods that are not simply reflections of man's own level of intelligence. So imagine, in other words, a real God, a real superior creature. If there was such, amongst the bare minimum of what such a creature would know, such a superior creature would be the inferior nature of the person talking to him. There is no possibility, there is no way that such a real non-mortally reflected superior being, if there was one, how they could ever be possibly disappointed, much less angry, at water for being wet. That almost is dangerous at the three-dimensional level. I don't mean that literally, because you can't go out and turn this into a snake oil pitch and win people over. But it almost will strike even the ordinary intelligence. If it was just kind of chilling out, laying back for a second, and you slipped it in, it might go, yeah, that's right. If there was a good old God like Jehovah or Allah, just the regular old routine ones there most everybody knows, what kind of God is it that you have to say, hey, I let you down again? I mean, if he made me, he knows what I am. What the hell does he want me to come around saying, well, I got drunk again? He's the one that made me. He's the one that made alcohol. Do I have to come do this? And just for a second, it would almost strike people. But of course, then ordinary people, it serves no purpose, and that's not what we're trying to do, is affect ordinary intelligence. But notice, again, you have this kind of coeval reality, wherein what seems to be going on here is operating quite properly, serving its own purpose, and yet there is another kind of reality that's not seen that can operate. And it's what's happening when you are able to do this, and you see that this is a larger fish, and this smaller one that seems to be reality, that seems to be ambiguous, if not self-contradictory, fits very nicely in this larger fish, and once you get an idea of the larger fish, it makes more sense. Or you get a notion of a larger ocean. Instead of you worrying about the Caribbean, you begin to see, well, hey, that's just part of the Atlantic. And then the fish in the Caribbean takes on a different aspect. That is that the idea is that it is proper. The feel, it's not stupidity. Things are wired up to be the way that people all over this planet believe, think, and feel that entreats to the gods to forgive me for being so slothful, for being so weak, just for being what I am, that is, for letting you down. Please forgive me. That's all I can ask is, I did it again, but at least I am here and admitting it. Please forgive me. That strikes a wide swath of humanity as well. Yeah, what else can you do? I'm not all that religious sometimes, but then again, periodically I think, well, there has got to be a God. To be as dirty a bastard as I am, there has got to be a God somewhere, and he's got to be really sharp. He's got to be merciful. Or if I was God, I'll tell you this, I probably wouldn't put up with people like me. Maybe once or twice, but I keep going back and saying, I did it again, I'm sorry. So, boy, there's got to be a God. Even at times I don't think so, there's got to be, because nobody else, unless it was some superior creature, would put up with this. It all feels just right. But coevally with that is a more expanded view, not just theoretically, but a more expanded, manifold understanding of it, that just even at that level, that cannot be true. Well, forget whether it can be true. Let's go back to where I started trying to point out that you've got to see that that reflection, that idea of a superior being, is in no wise superior. It is in no wise superior to you. All you're doing is talking to yourself. And I don't mean that just at some physical, material level, that just when you're praying you're talking to yourself. I don't mean that. I mean the whole scenario, you're talking to yourself. Your idea of a God is nothing but you. It can't be higher than you. You and anybody else and humanity collectively are cut up into segments over here in one city, over here in one area. But you cannot talk to anything higher than you are. Men love to repeat, however. I'll go ahead. They love this. It's not their fault. They don't have to ask forgiveness. But they love to repeat the idea that goes something like this, even in the scientific, in the non-religious world. They love to say, anything a man can imagine, he can do, or he can be. Okay, all right. But then they don't realize how limited is their imagination. Because philosophers, humanistic, atheistic philosophers can say, well, we do not need the concept of a God. Men can be better. We don't need that. That's outmoded. Man himself is his own raison d'etre, and he can expand his own life. What? All right. How? What do they describe? They might as well be standing in the bathroom talking to the mirror, saying, aren't you? That's it. And yet it is nothing amiss, but it is impossible. It is unnecessary for ordinary intelligence to ever have any idea of this. It can argue back and forth, as it always has, about particular gods, particular myths, and all that, but that's not what this is about. It's about seeing the energy behind the material, between the matter, the words, the descriptions, the thoughts of gods, of a superior aspect of man, which I was going to try to get you to look at in a second, because we're not just talking about gods. But notice, they believe. Man's made to believe that anything we can imagine. Hey, you have to begin to, if you're getting truly in a more hardwired scientific area, technological area, you would have to begin to condition it, but still the reality seems to be valid behind saying anything a man can imagine, anything man can imagine can eventually come to pass, or else we couldn't imagine it. Anything I can imagine, anything men can imagine, we can do. We can imagine loving our fellow man. People who are Christians, people who are Jews, people who are humanists will say, yes, I can imagine that. I can imagine the lions and the little lambs laying together, us loving our fellow man. So it is possible. The thing they can imagine is how limited the imagination is. Imagine that. They imagine gods that can't keep things together. They imagine gods that say you should do so and so, and then can't seem to remember that, well, I keep creating these things, and they never do it. They keep saying they try to, they get close, and it's slow, and it's, they make me mad, and then I forget about them, and I have to look back. Think about it. It is no exceptional idea that men have of gods. What I was going to suggest that you might consider then is to think, uh-oh, and then try and apply all of this to man's driven notions of there being a potentially superior aspect to himself. That I could be better. Why else am I here? Why else am I not completely satisfied? I could be better. How so? And again, everyone would think, well, that's silly. I can tell you exactly how so. And they begin to rattle them off. I drink too much. I got a bad temper. I'm unfaithful to my wife, my husband. I'm not religious enough. No one in the city will stand up and say, not within the sane sectors of the city, not the parts of life's body that is in charge of the plebeian bourgeoisie growth of which we're also immured. No one will stand up and say, well, listen, that's a bunch of duck flop. That's nothing people should aspire to. You would simply be shouted down by those of religious and non-religious persuasion, because everything I mentioned sounds decent. It reverberates in the nervous system as being, yes, that is how we should change. Not everybody drinks too much, but everybody should do better. Everybody should cut down on their bad habits. Everyone should have less of a critical attitude toward their fellow man. Everyone should try and serve, if not the gods, what the gods represented to men. We should all do better. Who is to judge what's better? And of course, in olden times, and still in certain parts of life's nervous system in man, they would say, well, the gods did. The gods sent us words, and here it is in our holy book. They can do that. Or there are many people now who would simply say, well, my own conscience, my own sense of reason, my own sophisticated intelligence tells me what I should do. I do not have to any longer lean on some apparent religious structure, because I simply know you should not cheat your fellow man. You should not be prejudiced for no reason against people. You should not be angry toward people. You should not be trying to take advantage of people. You should not be harming our beautiful planet. Who's going to argue with that? And I'm not, of course, arguing. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's meaningless. What kind of aspiration is that? How much better is that than you? How much better is that than the person that thought it? Well, I'll give you a secret. Well, I'll give you a hint, not a secret. It falls between 0 and 1. It's in the same category, I guess, as the present, or this generation, the great positive feelings between the Armenians and the Azerbaijans. Somewhere in there is how much better, is how reflective of a superior character it is, anything that you can imagine. But again, it sounds exactly right. I didn't mean to lose you. But it sounds right to anything, not just what I said, but anything that decent, humane, if not religious people would say that we should aspire to. What would make you personally better? What would make everyone personally better? And ordinary intelligence would tell you, well, it is superior to what I am. It is superior to what we are, such as love your neighbor as yourself. Let's just take that. And ordinary intelligence would say that what we were just talking about cannot be true, is not true. It's hardly worth them criticizing or responding. Because since we cannot do that, it has got to be superior to us. It's got to be beyond our grasp. Or else we would be executing it. It would be a fait accompli. We wouldn't be talking about it. It would not be something that we struggle to do. And so therefore it would be a characteristic. It is a correct, proper conception of man's superior potential. Is it? Do you see why, though? Do I have to keep beating on it? If you see that any dream that you have at ordinary intelligence, you and anyone else, of a dream of what a superior man is, cannot be superior to what the dreamer is. You cannot admire, you cannot aspire to anything higher than you are. If you begin to see that, it puts a whole nother uh-oh or huh over the big deal of man's idea. I'm talking about the ordinary ideas of what would be a superior creature, what would be a superior man. Especially in light of everyone failing, that no one can be the superior man, because well, if you saw that a goal you had, if you saw that a goal wasn't much, then could you also see that failure to reach that ain't a hell of a lot? I guess for those of a certain kind of oblique forward intelligence, I have just wrapped up at least 5,000 or 6,000 years of religious history, and maybe that's what shoes on that one shoe on the highway is. There is a kind of, might I suggest, a literary aside that I could point out, that historically, continually, there has been a continuity of poets, philosophers, and even non-aligned soreheads saying this, that which is won is done. That is, anything that you can achieve, anything that you have already accomplished, is nothing. That it's that which is yet to be gained, that which is unachieved, is of real value and highly prized. There's certain implications to that. For one thing is, you've got to keep humping with a futile job. You've got to keep pursuing absolutely useless endeavors. That is, you got to know, if you are still locked into that, you have got to live an ordinary life. You have got to live an episodic life. You have got to live in such a way that it's always as though the end of the sentence is just around the corner, just a few more hours, a few more miles, and it's like the sun goes down, or the time runs out for the night or today's episode, and you can't ever quite get there. And tomorrow you get up and you have to do the same thing. You've also got to take at the 3D level irritation and frustration to be, as they are, natural forms of energy. There is a very specific aspect that I was trying to slip up on us right here. The whole idea, and it has operational validity. When I started this paragraph of quoting the kinds of poets and philosophers that have been saying that, it was not an attack, it was not a denial that it had any use. But the idea that that which a man gains, that which he can accomplish, it loses its value. As soon as you've got it, no big deal. That it's always that which is just beyond our grasp that we most highly prize. Well, several things I said, I thought, well, now all of you could piece together your own to say, to keep on getting out there and humping and hacking away at what, in essence, from a more manifold view, is a kind of useless endeavor. That is part of the energy driving the secondary world, the city life, is to keep doing that. It's what you're supposed to do. It's part of our job here. So beyond that, what I was going to try to slip in is ponder this. It has validity. There is no doubt about it. It has operational necessity at the city level. It is an efficient form of energy, transformation. But there's an aspect of it that is only true in secondary affairs, not primary affairs. If you are simply, truly hungry and you eat, there is no feeling of, well, darn, I wish I hadn't eaten. Well, by eating, I ruined it. Or let us say that you find yourself truly in the throes of the rutting season, and you did that which some creatures do to alleviate the desire to rut, to get through and think, well, I wish I hadn't done it because now I don't want to do it right now. It is in secondary affairs that the validity, the usefulness of that which is done, that which man has, is no longer of any great value. It is only there that it has operational validity. And of course, also you might see that if it were not for the secondary world going on, no one would have ever said that. There would be no need to say it. The point is, there is not even a theoretical, not a poetic, not a verbal form of dissatisfaction possible at what would be the primary level as we've been describing it. If we could, in fact, separate those kinds of absolutely basic drives to keep the organism alive at a minimal level, while still in some way having you be as sophisticated, intellectually alive as an ordinary person is now. If all I could go on, and we were talking about primary affairs, of just that which would keep the race of man and you individually going, there is no possible way of there being a feeling that I am dissatisfied from having caught what I went for. It is only at the secondary level that the goals themselves not only seem ranging from almost impossible to reach to very expensive, very frustrating expenses involved to reach them, but then by God you get them, like after all this time, and I finally, I don't even want to tell you what I had to go through with to ever end up owning a Maserati. I don't even want to think about it. And God, that thing was a jewel. I don't know when I've ever been happier in my life for about 8 or 9 days. No offense to cars, no offense to the automotive industry of Italy. That is only possible. I'm trying to play hint, 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 like just saying it outright, because it touches everything that ordinary people do and think. But notice, now that life is lifted on a wide scale, everyone almost on this planet now, to the level that you have some secondary life, that, with small exceptions, just in general, the life of humans on this planet is now city-based, and the heart of human life is not out having to hump every day to absolutely keep body and soul together, as they say. And so they have a secondary life. They are now in the world of the mind, the world of arts, the world of civilization, city life, so you could say. that life has raised us up, that we are now no longer out there having to get up every morning, muck about, trying to find something to eat, trying to keep one eye on the weather, trying to watch out for saber-toothed pterodactyls, trying to watch that I'm somewhere close by when it starts getting dark, that I can jump in a ditch or I can find a cave. It's not that. So life has raised you above that level, raised life above that level. So we could all say, well, I appreciate that. That is, I believe, just everything taken into consideration, that I enjoy being here. I'm speaking for an ordinary person. Being here right now, living in the city, having at least, there's that sophisticated life, passing for being sophisticated. I appreciate being here as opposed to if I were living out in the jungle somewhere and was half starving to death and just my whole life was just hand to mouth, literally. I appreciate being here. But being here, also look, you're now in a world that the secondary activities are subject to that poetic notation of men do not prize that which they have. That is, if you were still, this is not right or wrong, and of course we're not involved with let's all go back and live in Rousseau's backyard. It's not the noble savage, but notice, if you were living at the primary level, there would be no such things as psychologically induced ulcers. No one could diagnose you as suffering from stress. You would not be stressed to be out there living hand to mouth. You might starve to death at the age of 20, but you would not die of stress. It is a different kind of, there's no word, but it would be a different kind of stress of having to get up bright and early and try to get out there before the warthogs and your neighbors and find some bushes, find something to eat. But when you did, there would not be the feeling that, well, the car sure was fun for about 7 or 8 days, and I suddenly looked down at that book and realized I owed somebody $64,000. So from one very specific, predictable view, ordinary people can say, if they had any occasion to look at it this way, that I am thankful that I live here, that I live during this time, and I am not out having to absolutely live from hand to mouth and fight each day and do not even know whether I can come up with enough food to feed me and mine. I could die. We could all die of starvation today. It's a fact. It's possible. I got to admit, I'm glad I don't live there. There and then. And so what you have now, though, is a world of secondary activities, and they are, relatively speaking, incapable of that kind of erstwhile, absolute, at least episodic, satisfaction. That is, I'm hungry and I ate. Nothing more to be said. I be horny, I got unhorny. Hey, you got a cigarette? And what's your sign? You come around here often. At that kind of primary level, the satisfaction does not bleed over into the next episode. That is, that you wake up and think, Jesus, where am I? Who is that girl? Who is that guy? That's not much fun. Boy, I wish I hadn't even picked her up. God, I got to quit drinking that kind of cheap gin. You understand? I'm trying to give you a secondary aspect of sex itself, being at a more primary level. That no matter what you do in the secondary world, it always seems to have a comma. It always seems to have an and or a but. There's nothing wrong with life, nothing wrong with people. That is the nature of secondary affairs. That is the basis of everyone from Shakespeare to Solomon to Confucius, pointing out in their own ways that, boy, the ordinary life of man just seems to be one damn thing after another. You know, that you can't ever seem to get your affairs wrapped up, which, of course, then is a short step, almost a trip, to thinking, well, it's not possible in this life, therefore it must be some greater afterlife, another life. It's got to be somewhere where we would be under the direct auspices of superior creatures who would not let this kind of thing happen, disregarding the fact that if there are such things, they are letting it happen. Disregarding the fact that if there are such creatures, they're not just letting it happen. They are making it happen. Either that or they're out of control. And therefore, to call them superior, you're going to have to deal with your own definitions. There is, if you would care to move this into an electric, biological variation. How about the three kinds of relationships, in a particular way biologically, that everybody knows? Parasitic, where you've got a visitor. All the three relationships, if you recall, we're talking about a visitor, an alien, and then the host. But in the parasitic relationship, the visitor helps himself and harms the host. And the second one was the commensalism, wherein the visitor, sometimes known as a parasite, if we were still talking about the first one, but the visitor helps himself without harming the host. Then the relationship symbiotically is, as you recall, that the host and the visitor seem to mutually benefit. Would anybody sense any possible pertinence, any useful pertinence, in regards to man's relationship to life, his host? As always, I don't bring up this little thing for any particular direct pointing of lessons that biology has, but by now all of you should realize that anything that comes out of man's mind, and it's not right or wrong, this is simply a verbal map that the so-called field of biology, the institution of biology, has observed other human minds, life looking through little human eyes, which of course is like probably life having extreme cataracts, but through human eyes it makes certain observations, and it came up with realizing that there is between creatures, between a kind of feast going on, that there are three distinct relationships they notice. In the parasitic, if we're going to talk about the host, is over there minding his own business. A nice elephant. And a flea gets on the elephant. Consider it a parasitic relationship. The visitor benefits, and the host is harmed. And then the commensal of being able to sit at the same table, the lions and the lambs, now I think about it, but the word is where you've got a host, or one thing feeding, one thing benefiting, but it would be you'd have to be a different kind of flea and elephant to say with that the flea gets on there and benefits, but it does no harm to the host, just nothing. And then the relationship called symbiotic is they both benefit. Now look upon at the three-dimensional level that if there's something superior, something that man's mind wants to even anthropomorphize, then this greater thing has got to be the host, and we have got to be the alien, the visitor, the flea. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but we have got to be the visitor. What would you, just offhand, think of those three? What would be the relationship between humanity and life? If we looked at life as being the elephant and us the flea, if you want that, which of the three would you think would be most possibly the best verbal picture of our relationship to life? How would you like to try and take that totally internally and try and picture what would be the relationship between you and your own internal voices that everyone realizes I've got me and I've got something else. If you and your people on tape are not talking about some form of schizophrenia, but you got at least two voices in you. Then there is a real question, though. Which one is the visitor and which one is the host? And a fellow over here said, I sure was hoping that you wouldn't bring that up. Well, there's a simple answer to that, which of course will not satisfy the simple-minded. But the simple answer is to that is according to which step they're doing, and whether it's the tango or the foxtrot. All right, you don't like that. It's according to whether you're actually watching them dance or whether you look off over the bar and see their reflection in the mirror. Which one of me talking is, if it was going to be divided in some useful way, or if I just theoretically tried to follow this and I thought, all right, in me there is, at least metaphorically, thank God for metaphorically, and Sears and Roebuck, that one of me would be the host, probably, if I must drag this out in any cruder fashion for you, that would be the better part of me, my conscience, my ideas of a superior man. That would be more the host, because that's what I'm aspiring to be, something greater. I would want to be the elephant, not just the flea. So that would be what people, if they were trying to follow this at all, an ordinary person would say, well, that would have to be it. But still, you're left with this. And they would just, that's about all they could do, is say, oh, yeah, I hear what you're saying metaphorically. All right. And so I guess you could say that there is some kind of relationship internally that would be a metaphor for those three kinds of biological relationships between a host and an alien or parasite, a visitor. So I could see that, yes, all right, you could say that that's a metaphor for a man's idea that he should be better, whether he's religious or just an idea of a more civilized man. That would take about all the energy anybody's ordinary intelligence could muster to go that far, because they couldn't go any further. I couldn't say, all right, wait a minute, if you got that, can you hold it just a second? Can you see that just what you described would be like a dance? And you're saying that the host, instead of an elephant and a flea, let's say they're dancing. The man might go, all right, I got that for a second. All right, now imagine that, I know it sounds silly, but the elephant is leading. He's the host. All right, I got that. But you don't realize that all you got to do is glance over here and look in the reflection, and the flea's leading. Of course, I don't know why anybody would listen to this, and of course they wouldn't. But an ordinary person, just check your own intelligence, goes, oh, come on. It would just absolutely get distracted. I got to go. Where's this? Really, I'm late now. But it is a literal three-dimensional fact. You cannot look and come up with a satisfying explanation, as always, at the three-dimensional level by believing that a dance step only goes in one direction, or that energy only flows in one direction. Because there is always the living reflection of it, and the flea can appear to be leading. That is, the part that would seem to be the aspirations, the admirable imagination or dreams that a person had about changing. All you got to do is look over this way, and it is now not doing the dipping, but being dipped. It is now dancing backwards. The elephant is now the alien, and the flea is the host. And it happens just like that. Being spurred on by the, of course, on tape, I don't know if you people can hear the outrageous, almost uncontrollable gasp and oohs and ahs. But be that as it may, I can't resist asking you to consider one more along these lines, though. Let's assume, I will assume, that some of you caught a piece of the fact that even in these kind of relationships, it is not just metaphorical. It just becomes invisible when we're talking about inside the nervous system of man rather than just a literal picture of an elephant and a flea trying to dance. But internally, it is absolutely operational that what would appear to be your dream of a better self, what would appear to be inside of a symbiotic relationship or a parasitic, any of the three, internally, that what would appear to be the host that could either be being harmed, not being harmed, or benefiting, and the alien, the visitor, benefiting in all three cases. But it can turn right over and you never notice it. Now, if you followed into that, not the words, but the energy of it, is why there's such things as man's feelings of uncertainty, ambiguities, why one religion seems to conflict with another, why one person's idea of morality switches from right now to a second later. And it's blamed on circumstance at times, which is other people's nervous system. And then it's blamed on the failure of the individual that is very moral, taking the high ground, speaking about how much they are in favor of every man being honest, but then 2 seconds later he saw a billfold laying there with a mouthful of shekels and pesos, and suddenly a man's idea of morality seems to have shifted. Well, that man should go and pray forgiveness to the gods because he's failed again, right? Right. They do not notice that the dance can go either way, that the elephant can be the visitor, the flea can be the host. That is the way it's got to be. Energy cannot go in one direction. And what seems to be adverse, inexplicable conflicts of morality that go on in life, and that people apparently even fight, and nations fight, institutions fight. You don't understand, it's a dance. It's if now the Protestants and the Catholics in Northern Ireland, or the Azerbaijans and the Armenians, suddenly got up and rushed at each other and had a big picnic, and they all hugged and kissed and did the polka. That is not much different from being in armed conflict. I know at every other level, any decent city level, you say that's not true. What could be more different than two groups fighting each other? What could be more different from that if in some way they did come to their senses and the gods smiled on them and they became close friends, very neighborly. Not just indifferent, became neighborly. The elephant's dancing backwards. Oh, now he's dancing forward. Now he's leading. Now he's not. The question after that I was going to threaten you with is, even after you realize that, if anybody got a glimpse of that, then the question I was going to propose is this. At any particular time, who is to say who is the host and who is the visitor? Now that's assuming that any of you got a glimpse, or you try it later, that yeah, that could be. At any particular time, the elephant could be dancing forward, or the flea could be leading. All you got to do is look around, and it's a fact. That the situation between host and alien, host and visitor, seems to be capable of changing instantly. If that be true, then who is to say at any particular time which of the case is in operation? Which of the options is actually operational? Who is to say? The host? The visitor? Or a third party? Need I point out, since all energy, all life protects itself, if you took the observation, if you took the word of either the host or the visitor, would any reasonable person be surprised to find that they might have had a, what do they call it, a vested interest in their observation? Can you at any time, now we're assuming you're talking to yourself, that you're trying to think, right now, my ideas of how I should change and what I should be, if I begin to see that there's a dance going on, there's energy going on, and it can go back and forth, and it always has, not just that it can, but it always has, which would shed more light on why it's so hard to change. Why I can't even seem to keep my mind. Why I can't even seem to hold the goal that I should be changing. Of course, you got to remember shoddy goals and the failure to reach them. But at any rate, why this all seems so complex? And then if I got you to consider the question, all right, well, right now, which way is it going? Is it like instead of fleeing the elephant, is it like my weaker self is in charge, my secondary pursuing self? Is it in charge, or is it even another form Is it the greater connection I may have to mother life? Am I resisting change in some crude fashion? Or is my resistance to change actually the admirable norm that I should not be considering to make the change I can, because it would actually be a step of devolution? I could end up in Akron. If I said, all right, who is making the judgment right now? If you want, all right, I hear the question. Me trying to change in this way is improper. It is not the attempted evolutionary step that I imagine it to be. And if I said, all right, if you went that far, which one of you is saying that to me now? Which one of you is saying that to you? Is it the flea or the elephant? And if you did go that far, again, I suggest that you might go, well, even if you can't put an answer right away, well, I think it was the flea. It doesn't matter. But if you think, well, it's the host, then I would assume that you might have some suspicion that the host may not come to the witness stand with totally clean hands. So who is to decide? Where would the decision come from? Now, this has got to be that you see beyond the point of these kind of totally unexceptional gods that apparently have sent all these other messages about what you should do. Don't take them as being the third party, because they are no better than the host or the alien in you. Where would such a decision come from? Who could possibly judge what was going on that would be profitable in you? If it could not be, if it was not the elephant, it wasn't the flea. That you couldn't depend on either one of them. You couldn't depend on their idea of what is evolution and what is not evolution, what is profitable, what is not profitable. What's left? Would it not have to come from a third party? And by a third party, of course, I don't mean me or the Pope or your mother. I'm talking about there has to be a third party. There has to be another possibility beyond just your exhaust system and the catalytic converter. There's got to be something else. If there's not, you simply keep recycling the same exhaust. For those of you getting this on audio, I guess you noticed the tape ran out. Or is it video?